Where we are now in terms of our border policy and our European frontiers is somewhat paradoxical. The modern European Union was created to a great extent as a result of some of the atrocities and dictatorships that we've experienced in our history. And it was created as an attempt to stop that happening again. Never again is possibly the founding phase of the European Union. We also like to counterpose the Western democracies of Europe to the USSR and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. So if you actually look at the deaths of people who tried to cross the Berlin Wall and who were killed trying to cross it, estimates vary, but in the region of 125 to 136 people. Once the Cold War came down, there was a lot of talk of this open new Europe, this borderless world. Francis Fukuyama's The End of History mentions this. Obviously this is the famous one. I'm sure lots of people here have had to study Francis Fukuyama, where he talked about reaching the end of history, where liberal democracy is the final effective political model for humanity to have. There's also Kenichi Hame's Borderless World Power and Strategy in the Global Marketplace. This talks about free movement of goods, free movement of information, and free movement of people. The European Union again followed on from a lot of these. And one of the main attempts and driving points of the European Union, according to its members, people involved in it, is promoting human rights. The EU has said that human rights are one of its most important undertakings in the Treaty of Rome, which is one of the founding documents, the Treaty of Maastricht and the Treaty of Lisbon. There's also a Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. Most countries in the EU and the EU itself have subscribed to the 1951 Geneva Convention on Refugees, and the EU also expresses support for the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So it's no exaggeration to say that the European Union claims to be all about human rights. My objective today is to persuade you that that is in fact incorrect, and that the European Union does not in fact promote human rights. And of course, yeah, as it says here, the EU is the winner of the 2012 Nobel Peace Prize for promoting peace, democracy and human rights across the continent of Europe. So I say it's paradoxical because, in fact, if we look at deaths on the EU border, in between 1988 and 2011, estimates upwards of 15,000 people have died trying to enter the European Union in that space of time. The image to... Yes, question?
That seems huge. How is it that high?
How is it that high? We will get onto that, don't worry. Because in reluctant defence of the Berlin Wall, it was only covered parts of Germany, whereas the EU border stretches from Spain to Greece and from Greece to Poland. So it is a very, very big number, but hopefully I'll be able to explain that to you in depth through this presentation. The image to the top right are two different walls. The one on the left-hand side is the Berlin Wall, the one on the right-hand side is the Evros Wall, which secures Greece's land border with Turkey. So I put this together just to try and lead to this pointing out that perhaps the European Union isn't so big on human rights, and perhaps it has more in common with the old Europe that we're trying to leave behind. So what I'm going to do now is try and go on, if we could call it such, a bit of a tour of European borders, go from one space to another, and try and break it down a bit. So we'll start off with Spain, specifically the Spanish frontier. Not many people are aware of this, but the European Union and Spain actually begins in Africa. There are two enclaves called Ceuta y Melilla, and they're actually in Morocco. These enclaves are the last remnants of the Spanish colonial empire that was carved out in Morocco over centuries, beginning with the expulsion of the Moors in the 15th century. They then attempted to carry on that expulsion into North Africa. Just as we have our small colonial outposts, you know, we have Gibraltar, we have the Falkland Islands. Similarly, Spain has Ceuta and Melilla. These are tiny towns that just on the sea, on the edge of Morocco, and they're actually a militarized border. They're both surrounded by fences. I don't have an image here apart from this top one, which is a member of Spain's. Wait, is that the Foreign Legion? Yeah, it is. Patrolling those two fences. So both in Ceuta and Melilla, they're enclosed by a double fence, so there's two rows. Those are cleared of cover for about 100 metres. There's fibre optic noise and movement sensors, which attract CCTV cameras and drone controls. The fences used to be covered in razor wire, but that caused too many deaths and injuries, so they've actually replaced the razor wire with an automated hinge. So once you get to the top of one of those fences, the hinge then swings outwards, making it extremely difficult to climb across. Should you get over the automated swinging fences, then you enter something called a tri-dimensional fence, which I believe is just a series of obstacles in the middle between the two. That triggers CS gas sprinklers. So if you cross the first fence, you get hit with CS gas before you can go over the second one. On the one side, this fence is patrolled by Guardia Civil, which is the Spanish military police, and the Spanish Foreign Legion. On the other side, it's patrolled by the Moroccan police and the Moroccan army. So it's a massive underestimation to say it's easy to cross. It's exceptionally difficult. But people still do try and cross. And they try in large groups to maximise the chances of success. In 2005, there was one of these attempts and became known in Spain as the crisis of the fences. When lots of people try and cross, the situation gets more exaggerated than normal. Morocco doesn't exactly have the best human rights record, but it's particularly bad around Ceuta and Melilla. Spain also have had numerous allegations of human rights violations. One man in 2005 died because he was shot in the throat with a rubber bullet. The coroner's report in Ceuta was that he died of a displaced trachea, which is this thing here, which is somewhat hiding things because his trachea didn't just displace itself. Sounds like part of his body fell out. He was shot in the neck with a rubber bullet. Another thing that Spain does when people try and cross this border is pushbacks. So if people get into one of the enclaves, they then force them back, sometimes at bayonet point. This contravenes most refugee conventions because the idea is that if you get into a country, you're allowed to claim asylum there. Obviously, if you're being pushed out again, this isn't possible. In Morocco, people sort of extrajudicial deportation. Moroccans round people up and send them to either Western Sahara or Algeria, which are the two countries bordering Morocco. The really tricky thing about this fence is it's a grey area. Both Moroccans and the Spanish essentially blame each other whenever something goes wrong to mitigate responsibility. Even though the fence is actually built 2 metres behind where Spanish territory actually starts, the Spaniards claim that you need to be over the fence in order to claim asylum. So anything that happens within that very, very contested space of ground is just this grey area where there's barely any judicial or legal responsibility. So that's Ceuta and Melilla, these two parts of Spain in Africa. Moving on to Spain proper, obviously one of the other significant features of Spain is the fact that it has the Strait of Gibraltar, which is the closest crossing point between Africa and Europe. This was widely used to cross into Spain until quite recently, because Spain, funded by the EU, has built something called the Sistema Integrado de Vigilancia Exterior, which would translate in English as the Integrated System of External Vigilance. It's a big radar system that can spot anything from the size of a ferry to a lilo crossing the straits. And this has more or less shut down the Strait of Gibraltar as a viable route to cross into Europe. Because of that, routes are pushed further out, away from the Strait of Gibraltar, and people started trying to go to the Canary Islands. This is called the Cauca route. This is a hell of a lot more dangerous because it's a lot further to the Canary Islands from Africa than it is just across the Strait of Gibraltar. So this resulted in lots of people getting killed, drowning, or as their boats failed trying to get there. This is interesting because this is one example of something we see again and again and again, especially when it comes to maritime crossings, whereby the EU, although it claims to have humanitarian intentions, by increasing security and by making the easy crossing points more difficult, pushes people out into harder routes and thus results into more people dying. So although the alleged aim will be humanitarian, what actually happens is that more migrants lose their lives because it becomes harder and harder to get into Europe. So yeah, just from 2001 to 2006, it was 7,000 people that died on the Cauca route. To counteract this, the Spanish Navy and police forces, again funded by the EU, began joint operations with West African militaries and countries to intercept the boats before they'd even left West African territorial waters. So in 2007, this managed to turn back 6,000 people, and it has brought down the amount of people travelling to Spain from West Africa. The thing is though, this is a projection of sovereignty and a projection of our borders into other places. So the agreement is, okay, we'll give you X million amount of funding on the conditions that you allow our boats to come in and control people trying to leave your country. So the EU has essentially, in this case, expanded its sovereignty into Africa to a great extent. Okay, next. So inside Spain itself, so that's just the external border, situation for migrants is deteriorating. I'm sure lots of people here have heard about Spain's economic problems. The unemployment rate for Spanish youth is around 50%. It's 25% for adults. So if that's Spanish nationals, there are no figures for migrants, but you can imagine how difficult it would be for them to survive. One of the worst things that happened is denial of health services. Using similar logic that's being done in the UK, the Spanish government said we're not going to allow migrants to use the Spanish National Health Service because it's a strain on resources. Fortunately, a lot of doctors don't agree with this, so there's been a large amount of conscientious objectors that have said this is in contravention of the Hippocratic Oath and that they will continue to treat people. However, to do that, they'd have to do it clandestinely and potentially risk their jobs. So we're not really sure how that's going to turn out. Another development that's happened inside Spain is developments of barrios de resistencia, which is sort of neighbourhoods of resistance. In any Spanish town will be one or two parts that are generally the most rundown and impoverished, which is where most refugees tend to live. And there they suffer endless police harassment. However, this is something that isn't just suffered by refugees in these barrios. This is also suffered by Spaniards and all the people that live there. So for migrants that manage to make it inside Spain, there's been an increase in cooperation and organising together to try and resist the police checks and being arrested. This is particularly taken up after 2011. After 2011, a movement called Quince de Enero, which we know as the Indignados, the Spanish version of the Occupy movement, who, after they were evicted from their squares that they occupied in central towns, moved into the barrios and are working with migrants quite often to try and ensure that they don't experience this kind of harassment. So we have a video here from a barrio in Madrid called Lavapiés. The commentary is in Spanish, I'm afraid, but it basically shows refugees and residents taking action together against the police. Technical errors, 11. Interesting. Okay, so it's a very strong place we wrote our videos today. Hang on a sec.
Es el momento. Varias decenas de personas increpan a la policía en el barrio madrileño de Lavapiés. Ocurrió ayer, donde varios agentes intentaron llevarse a un inmigrante a una comisaría para identificarlo. La policía asegura que el suceso se originó cuando el extranjero fue interceptado en el metro al pretender entrar sin pagar. Pero los vecinos no comparten esta versión y, apoyados por el 15M, que se sumó a la protesta, aseguran que los agentes pretendían hacer una redada ilegal contra los inmigrantes. Desde las redes sociales han difundido precisamente este vídeo grabado durante el incidente. Finalmente, no hubo arrestos y los vecinos despidieron así a la policía cuando abandonó Lavapiés.
Okay, so I really can't have videos on doing PowerPoint, so I'll just quit it and do it like this. It's somewhat awkward. So what people are chanting over there is we're not suspects, we're residents, so we're not illegal, we live here, and also no police searches without our permission, I think. That's in Lavapiés, which is the district in Madrid, which has a particularly strong movement, but there's similar stuff going on all over Spain. I just live in the north, and in San Francisco district, there were, when I arrived, there were 3 African bombars, and when I left there was one because the 2 had shut down. But the sort of resistance is ongoing, both at the borders of Spain and also inside internally, to try and give, well, a more improved situation for refugees and migrants. Okay, so that's Spain. Moving on to the Central Mediterranean. See this? So that video works. Okay, good. One works. This is the central Mediterranean, but also this refers to Italy. I haven't had time to look at every single aspect of the European border situation, so I've picked out a few ones. Okay, so the Mediterranean is probably the largest of the European frontiers. We now have something called the Schengen Agreement. Everyone know what that is? Okay, see some yes and no. The Schengen Agreement is an agreement whereby we make the European Union have one border, or largely one border. In fact, I should have explained, sorry. That's what this thing is here. All these countries in blue are signers of the Schengen Agreement. So you could feasibly walk from Portugal to Poland, as long as you go through Switzerland, without having to show a passport, if you are a European citizen. That in many ways can be considered a positive development, that Europeans can travel from one part to another. Yeah.
Switzerland is in Schengen. So it's not like that.
Say again, sorry.
They're all in Schengen.
They're in the Schengen, but they're not in the EU.
Yeah, hence they're shaded in yellow. The ones that aren't in the European Union, but also in Schengen. So yeah. Now the result of Schengen, apart from the fact that Europeans can go where they want, is that because the internal frontiers between countries have been removed or reduced, that's seen an increase on the external frontiers. So all around the edges of the Schengen zone, there's been an increase in border security. Because European countries have pooled their resources to try and maintain this. So this means that the Mediterranean is now probably Europe's largest frontier. Since the Spanish crossing was locked down, a lot of people have tried to cross into Italy or Malta from Northern Africa, specifically Lampedusa, but we'll come back to that. Most of the boats people use to try and cross are not seaworthy, really poorly equipped, Zodiacs, dinghies and fishing vessels, stuff like that. They're not going to get these boats back, so no one's going to hand over their cruise yacht for these sort of things. And also, these are refugees. These are the world's poorest, most desperate people fleeing conflict zones. So they can't be very picky about how they cross. They don't use their GPS, and the mafia and people smugglers take their mobile phones away before the crossing because that increases the likelihood of being tracked and caught. But before they can even begin to attempt the crossing in the Mediterranean, they run up against the border with North Africa. As you can see here, there's an EU policy called European Naval Policy. This has tried to involve North African dictatorships in maintaining the EU's frontier. So before the Arab Spring, we gave funding to Gaddafi, Mubarak, Ben Ali, also the King of Morocco, whose name escapes me. And the European Union both trained and funded these dictators to stop migrants being able to cross into Europe through the Mediterranean. I might have some numbers here. This would either be rounding people up on the coast, on the North African coast, or trying to intercept them in the Sahara Desert, coming up through the Sahara to get to these North African countries to cross into Europe. Again, that means that migrants have taken longer and more dangerous routes, so they're less likely to be detected. So a lot of those 15,000 deaths can be in the Sahara, which again, it's a way out there estimate. No one's monitoring this thing in any reliable way, shape or form. Obviously, if you give dictators training and equipment, they're not going to respect the human rights of those migrants. So the EU was arming people to torture and kill in many cases migrants to keep their countries safe. This all came to a head during the Arab Spring, of course, because this border that had been so carefully constructed by the European Union fell to pieces and collapsed. And all of a sudden, not only could all those North African migrants get through, not only could all those African migrants get through, also people in the countries that were undergoing revolution often wanted to leave. They became refugees because their own countries were becoming war zones. Another factor that compounded this was that when NATO began attacking Libya, Gaddafi not only allowed people to cross, he encouraged people to cross. There's a couple of witness testimonies out there, not a hell of a lot of evidence, but enough to suggest that this was happening, where when NATO began the campaign, Gaddafi released all the people smugglers